The Last Human, Part 1, Awakening. The vigilant fury cut through the silence of space, its sleek hull gleaming under the distant starlight. The exploration vessel, pride of the Galactic Empire's scout fleet, pursued a stray probe through a field of drifting meteors. Commander Elano stood at the bridge, his sharp pink eyes fixed on the main viewscreen, watching as his crew masterfully navigated through the debris field. "Sir, unusual reading at coordinates 227 Mark 4, reported Lieutenant Vex, her long black hair floating gracefully in the artificial gravity field. "It's not the probe we're after, but—" "Show me," Elano ordered, his stuttered nose ridges twitching with curiosity. The viewscreen shifted, revealing something that made even the seasoned commander pause. Floating amid the wreckage was a pristine cryopod, its surface unmarked despite its apparent age. The marking, Pandora B1, was clearly visible on its side. "By the stars," Elano whispered, then quickly composed himself. "Bring it aboard." Along with the probe. The Fury's tractor beam activated, sweeping up both the pod and the probe in one smooth operation. Within minutes, a crowd of curious Imperial soldiers gathered in the cargo bay, their excitement barely contained as they circled the mysterious pod. "You've got to be kidding me," one soldier exclaimed, peering through the frosted glass. "Is that what I think it is?" Commander Elano pushed through the crowd, his own curiosity getting the better of him. One look inside the pod sent him into fits of laughter. "By the stars, I think this might actually be a human." The revelation sent ripples of amusement through the gathered crew. Humans were nothing but a cautionary tale in the modern galaxy, a primitive species that had destroyed itself in nuclear fire centuries ago. Finding one preserved in a cryopod was like discovering a living fossil. "I thought these silly things all died in their nuclear fallout," another soldier chuckled. "We've got to send this to the CRF, Elano declared, referring to the Central Research Facility. "The CRF? I think this one belongs in a museum. Or maybe a zoo," someone cracked from behind him. Elano silenced the laughter with a sharp clap. "That's enough fooling around. Set a course for the capital. Admiral Corrin is going to love this." The Vigilant Fury's engines thundered as it entered hyperspace, carrying its precious cargo toward the heart of the Empire. None of them realized they were transporting more than just a preserved human, they were delivering the seeds of their own destruction. In the sterile white labs of the Central Research Facility, Sergeant Ryan Carter's frozen form became the center of attention. Dr. Mayan Taller, the lead researcher, circled the pod like a predator studying its prey. Her long, silky black hair shimmered under the harsh lab lights, and her pink eyes gleamed with barely contained contempt. "Look at him," she sneered, her sharp claw-like fingers tracing the pod's surface. "So fragile, so simple. How did they ever survive on their own planet?" Her team murmured in agreement, their pointed ears twitching slightly as they recorded their observations. The air was thick with their superiority complex, their certainty that they were studying nothing more than a curious relic of a failed species. Admiral Corrin Vell's arrival silenced the room. His imposing figure commanded immediate respect as he approached the pod, his dark pink eyes flashing with arrogant intensity. "This is it?" he asked, his voice a low growl of disbelief. "This is the last of the humans? The species that annihilated itself in nuclear fire?" His deep laugh echoed through the lab as he turned to Dr. Taller. "Wake him up. Let's see what this last human has to offer. I'm sure it'll be entertaining." The lab machinery hummed to life as they prepared to thaw their specimen. They expected nothing more than a weak, primitive creature. They were about to discover how terribly wrong they were. The sound of hissing gas filled the lab as the pod unsealed. Frost evaporated into the air, revealing Ryan Carter's preserved form. His eyes flickered open, adjusting to the harsh light as unfamiliar faces swam into view. For a moment, he existed between worlds, between Earth's final days and this strange new reality. Memories flooded back, the blinding flash of nuclear detonations, the screams of the dying, the sky turned green with radiation. He remembered his mission, his purpose. He was part of Pandora Unit, Earth's last-ditch effort to ensure humanity's survival. They were more than soldiers, they were weapons designed to operate in the darkest moments of human existence. A researcher injected his neck with a nanite translator, allowing him to understand their language. Ryan remained still, his trained senses already cataloging everything around him. The air was too clean, the walls too pristine. These weren't humans, their pointed ears, stuttered nose ridges, and pink eyes made that clear enough. Dr. Taller observed him from across the room, exchanging mocking glances with her team. "He doesn't look so dangerous now, does he?" one researcher remarked, scribbling notes on a data pad. Admiral Vell leaned in closer, his contempt obvious. "This is what they called a soldier. No wonder they burned their own planet down. Fragile, chaotic creatures." Ryan sat up slowly, letting his muscles adjust to movement after centuries of stasis. His mind was already sharp, processing everything around him. They had no idea what they were dealing with. His specialty wasn't brute force, it was psychological warfare. Break the mind, and the body would follow. He let them talk, let them mock him, showing nothing but a seemingly innocent smile. They spoke freely around him, discussing the Galactic Empire, instability in the outer worlds, growing unrest. Every word was ammunition in Ryan's arsenal. The researcher monitoring his vitals chuckled. "Harmless," she muttered. Ryan's lips curled into a faint smirk. "You have no idea," he whispered under his breath. Despite the fog of PTSD lurking at the edges of his consciousness, his training took over. He noted guard patterns, security protocols, the facility's layout. These aliens had given him everything he needed, gift-wrapped in their own arrogance. They didn't understand what they'd found. Ryan Carter wasn't just a soldier, he was a specialist in destabilization operations. Before Earth's fall, he led covert missions designed to take down nations from within. He was an agent of chaos, and he was about to tear their comfortable little world apart. Lieutenant Rana Shull was assigned as his primary guard, her dazzling pink eyes initially cold and dismissive. But Ryan saw through her immediately, saw her doubt, her ambition, her desperate need for approval. He carefully crafted his persona, cooperative, soft-spoken, seemingly weak but with just enough mystery to intrigue her. After a week of careful observation and calculated small talk, Ryan made his move. He caught her eye as she stood outside his cell, his voice soft but intense. "I know you're not like the others." "What do you mean?" she asked, absently tucking a strand of silky black hair behind her pointed ear. "You're smarter than them," Ryan continued, his voice almost hypnotic. "You see things they don't. You know I'm not a threat. I've been nothing but cooperative since I woke up." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I could help you, if you let me." Shull frowned, but Ryan could see the doubt in her eyes. "Help me how?" "I have knowledge about tactics, about the way soldiers think, the way they break." His smile widened slightly. "You give me a little space, a little room to stretch my legs, and I'll share some of that knowledge with you. You could use it to move up the ranks. Maybe even impress Admiral Vell." She hesitated, but Ryan could see her pride working against her, her ambition drawing her closer to his trap. "Just small breaks, Carter," he added, his voice like honey laced with poison. "Let me walk the facility. I'm harmless, remember." Against her better judgment, she agreed. It started with short walks through restricted zones, always under her watchful eye. But Ryan wasn't interested in exercise, he was laying groundwork, planting seeds of discord that would soon bloom into chaos. The first signs were subtle, increased tension between guards, whispered arguments, suspicious glances. Ryan would pass by groups of soldiers, dropping carefully crafted comments designed to create doubt and paranoia. "Did you hear what Lieutenant Shull said about you?" he'd whisper to one guard, keeping his voice low and conspiratorial. "She thinks you're slipping up." Might be a promotion in it for someone else if you don't shape up. To another, you see the way they look at you. They're just waiting for you to screw up. The pressure built slowly but steadily. Guards began accusing each other of backstabbing, of being resistant sympathizers, of plotting against their superiors. Ryan moved through the chaos like a ghost, using his allowed freedom to access restricted areas, sabotaging minor systems, and creating just enough malfunctions to feed the growing paranoia. Lieutenant Scholl was unraveling, and Ryan watched with dark satisfaction as she paced outside his cell, biting her claws and pulling at her hair. She couldn't understand what was happening, couldn't see that the harmless human she'd befriended was the architect of her facility's destruction. As the facility descended into chaos, Ryan Carter smiled. The Galactic Empire had found Pandora's box, and in their arrogance, they'd opened it. Now they would learn why humanity's last weapon wasn't a bomb or a virus, it was a man trained to turn order into chaos, to transform unity into discord, and to break an empire not with force, but with fear. The game was just beginning, and Ryan Carter was playing for keeps. The Last Human, Part 2, Seeds of Discord. Admiral Corin Vell stood before the Central Research Facility's governing board, his usual confidence wavering as he delivered his report. The past month had seen an unprecedented spike in security incidents, personnel conflicts, and equipment malfunctions. It's just a series of unfortunate coincidences, he assured them, but his stuttered nose ridges twitched nervously. Nothing we can't handle. In the back of the room, Dr. Mayan Taller watched with growing unease. She alone had noticed the pattern, how everything had started changing after they woke the human. But every time she tried to voice her concerns, she found herself questioning her own judgment. After all, how could one primitive creature cause so much trouble? Meanwhile, in his cell, Ryan Carter sat cross-legged on his bed, eyes closed as if meditating. In reality, he was carefully tracking the facility's daily rhythm through the subtle vibrations in the walls. A month of careful observation had given him an intimate understanding of the Empire's protocols and hierarchies, and more importantly, their weaknesses. Lieutenant Rana Scholl approached his cell, her once pristine uniform showing signs of stress and neglect. Dark circles had formed under her pink eyes, and her usually immaculate black hair hung limp around her face. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, trying to maintain her professional demeanor. Ryan opened his eyes slowly, his lips curving into that disarming smile she'd grown to both trust and fear. "I'm worried about you, Rana," he said softly. "You look tired." She glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping closer to the cell. "Things are tense. The other officers, they're acting strange. Paranoid. Yesterday, Commander Nexus accused his own second-in-command of sabotage." "Really?" Ryan's voice was perfectly calibrated to show concern while masking his satisfaction. "That doesn't sound like him. At least, not from what you've told me." Scholl ran her claws through her hair, a habit she developed recently. "Nothing makes sense anymore. The security systems keep malfunctioning, but our technicians can't find any problems. Officers who've worked together for years are suddenly at each other's throats." Ryan stood and approached the barrier, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. "You know, on Earth, we had a saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Maybe your empire has grown too comfortable in its supremacy." The seeds he'd planted were bearing fruit. The facility's staff was fracturing along lines of rank and department, each group becoming increasingly suspicious of the others. Ryan had carefully crafted this division, using his walks to spread carefully tailored rumors and insinuations. To the security officers, he hinted at research staff conducting unauthorized experiments. To the researchers, he suggested the security team was planning to seize control of the facility. To the maintenance crews, he implied both groups were conspiring to blame them for the ongoing problems. But his masterpiece was his manipulation of the facility's computer systems. During his permitted walks, he'd noted how the Empire's technology relied heavily on automated systems and AI assistance. Their arrogance had led them to trust their machines implicitly, a trust he was now exploiting. Using skills honed during Earth's final wars, Ryan had begun introducing subtle errors into the facility's databases. Nothing dramatic, just small discrepancies in inventory counts, minor variations in security schedules, slight alterations to personnel files. Each change was too small to trigger alarms but large enough to create confusion and doubt. "Have you noticed," he said to Scholl, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "how the security logs never quite match up with the actual patrols anymore?" She stiffened. "How do you know about that?" "I observe. I listen. And I worry." He paused, letting concern fill his features. "Especially about you, Rana. You're one of the few people here I trust." The lie rolled off his tongue smoothly. In truth, he had specifically targeted Scholl's security codes, using them to access restricted systems during his walks. Soon, when the inevitable investigation began, all signs would point to her as a primary suspect. But Ryan's plans extended far beyond mere facility disruption. Through careful questioning and observation, he'd learned about the Empire's structure, its political tensions, and most importantly, its fears. The outer systems were already restless, and the Empire's grip on its territories was not as secure as they pretended. During his next scheduled walk, Ryan passed by a group of young security officers. He'd already identified them as ambitious and frustrated with the current leadership. As he walked by, he casually mentioned, "Interesting report from the outer systems today. Shame they're keeping it classified." He knew there was no such report, but the officers' reactions told him everything he needed to know. They were hungry for information, for any advantage that might help them advance their careers. By the end of the day, they would be desperately trying to access classified files that didn't exist, setting off security alerts that would only increase the growing paranoia. In the research wing, he employed different tactics. To Dr. Taller's junior researchers, he expressed amazement at humanity's supposed technological achievements, carefully describing advanced weapons systems that had never existed. He knew their professional pride would drive them to prove they could replicate or surpass these fictional human technologies. "You know," he told one particularly ambitious researcher, "Earth's quantum displacement fields could tear apart matter at the molecular level. But I'm sure your people have developed something far more sophisticated by now." The researcher's stuttered nose ridges twitched with barely concealed excitement. Within hours, unauthorized experiments were being conducted in secret labs, each failure adding to the researcher's frustration and desperation. But Ryan's most insidious manipulation targeted the Empire's fundamental beliefs about humanity. Through carefully crafted conversations, he began suggesting that humans hadn't actually destroyed themselves, that perhaps there was more to the story. "It's interesting," he would muse to anyone who would listen, "how your historical records about Earth's fall are so incomplete. Almost as if someone wanted to hide something." The suggestion took root, spreading through the facility like a virus. People began questioning the official narrative, wondering what other historical facts might be propaganda. The Empire's carefully constructed worldview was developing cracks. Admiral Vell noticed the changing atmosphere but couldn't identify its source. He increased security measures, which only served to heighten tensions. He ordered investigations, which fueled suspicions. Every action he took to restore order played directly into Ryan's hands. Late one night, as Ryan lay in his cell, he heard the first physical fight break out between guards. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the corridors, followed by shouts and running feet. Emergency protocols activated, sealing off sections of the facility. Lieutenant Scholl rushed to his cell, her uniform disheveled. "What's happening?" she demanded. "Somehow, this all started after you arrived. Are you responsible?" Ryan looked at her with perfectly feigned innocence. "How could I be? I'm just a primitive human, remember? Locked in this cell, under constant surveillance." She wanted to believe him. Needed to believe him. Because the alternative, that they had so completely underestimated him, that he had been manipulating them all along, was too frightening to contemplate. But the truth was far worse than she imagined. Ryan Carter wasn't just sowing discord, he was systematically dismantling the psychological foundations of the Empire's power. Every doubt he planted, every suspicion he nurtured, every conflict he sparked was part of a larger plan. The Empire had built its power on absolute control, on unquestioning obedience, on the certainty of its own superiority. Ryan was showing them how fragile that control really was, how quickly certainty could turn to doubt, how easily obedience could become rebellion. In the darkness of his cell, Ryan smiled as alarms blared and chaos spread through the facility. The Empire thought they had found a harmless relic of a dead civilization. Instead, they had awakened humanity's last and most dangerous weapon, a man trained to turn order into chaos, to transform unity into discord, and to break an empire not with force, but with fear. The game was evolving, and Ryan Carter was just getting started. As he listened to the growing chaos outside his cell, Ryan reflected on the next phase of his plan. The facility was just the beginning. Soon, the doubt and paranoia he'd cultivated would spread beyond these walls, infecting the entire empire like a virus. They had awakened Pandora's last box, and now they would face the consequences of their arrogance. The Last Human, Part 3, The Resistance Rises. Commander Derek Voss stood in the shadows of Lower District 7, his keen eyes scanning the streams of data flowing across his neural interface. The Resistance leader had spent years building a network of spies within the Empire's infrastructure, but nothing had prepared him for the reports coming from the Central Research Facility. "It's impossible," his second-in-command, Major Lyra Nexus, whispered beside him. Her pink eyes glowed with an unusual intensity in the dim light. One human couldn't possibly cause this much disruption. And yet, Voss replied, his stuttered nose ridges twitching thoughtfully, "Look at these patterns. The facility is tearing itself apart from the inside." Their intelligence network had picked up increasing signs of instability within the CRF. Security protocols were breaking down, researchers were turning against each other, and equipment malfunctions had reached unprecedented levels. But what truly caught Voss's attention was the subtlety of it all. This wasn't the crude sabotage of amateur rebels, but something far more sophisticated. "We need to get him out," Voss decided. "Whatever he is, whatever he's capable of, we need him on our side." Meanwhile, deep within the facility, Ryan Carter was accelerating his plans. The chaos he'd sown had reached a critical point, and now he needed to ensure his eventual escape would look like someone else's fault. His target was Dr. Mayan Taller. During one of his supervised walks, Ryan paused near her laboratory, knowing she was inside. "It's fascinating," he said loudly enough for nearby guards to hear, "how some of the security protocols seem specifically designed to fail." The guards shifted uncomfortably. Ryan had spent weeks feeding them snippets of information suggesting that Dr. Taller was conducting unauthorized experiments, possibly even working with resistance elements. Now, he just needed to push her into making a mistake. "I've noticed Dr. Taller spending a lot of time in the restricted archives," he mentioned casually to Lieutenant Schull during their next conversation. "She seems very interested in Earth's history. Almost, obsessively so." The seeds of suspicion took root quickly. Within days, Dr. Taller found herself under increasing scrutiny. Her access to certain areas was restricted, her research was questioned, and her colleagues began avoiding her. The pressure was building, just as Ryan had planned. But Ryan's manipulation extended beyond individuals. He had begun targeting the Empire's technological infrastructure itself. During his permitted computer access times, he discovered that the Empire's networks were built on protocols remarkably similar to Earth's quantum computing systems, a weakness he could exploit. Using techniques developed during Earth's final wars, Ryan began introducing subtle corruptions into the facility's quantum data streams. To the Empire's systems, these corruptions appeared as normal quantum fluctuations, but they were actually carrying hidden instructions, spreading through the network like a virus. The effects were insidious. Security cameras would glitch at crucial moments. Door locks would malfunction in patterns that seemed random but actually created clear paths through the facility. Communication systems would garble messages in ways that created misunderstandings and heightened tensions. Admiral Vell was growing increasingly desperate. His latest report to the Imperial High Command had been disastrous, with questions raised about his competence and loyalty. In his paranoia, he began seeing enemies everywhere, not realizing that his own actions were furthering Ryan's plans. The Admiral ordered increased security measures, including random searches and surveillance of his own staff. The new protocols created resentment and fear, pushing more people toward the breaking point. Ryan watched it all with calculated satisfaction, knowing that each new restriction only added fuel to the fire. But the true masterstroke of Ryan's plan was yet to come. Through careful observation and subtle questioning, he had identified several staff members with connections to the Resistance. He never approached them directly, instead, he ensured they overheard conversations or saw evidence that suggested their fellow Resistance members were about to be exposed. The panic this caused led to hasty, uncoordinated actions. Small acts of sabotage, attempted data theft, and rushed communications with outside contacts, all of which created exactly the kind of chaos Ryan needed for his eventual escape point. One evening, as Ryan sat in his cell reviewing his mental map of the facility, he heard unusual movements in the corridors. The pattern of footsteps was wrong, these weren't Imperial guards. A small smile crossed his face. The Resistance had finally made their move. Commander Voss himself led the infiltration team, having used the growing chaos as cover for their operation. They moved through the facility like shadows, following paths that seemed to have been cleared for them, though they didn't realize this was by Ryan's design. When they reached his cell, Voss found Ryan waiting calmly, as if he'd been expecting them. "Commander Derek Voss," Ryan said softly, "I was wondering when you'd arrive." Voss's eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" "I know many things," Ryan replied cryptically. "Including the fact that your Resistance movement is on the verge of collapse. You've been fighting the wrong way, Commander. Brute force can't bring down an empire, but fear and doubt can rot it from within." The facility's alarms suddenly blared to life, but Ryan remained perfectly calm. "We have approximately 7 minutes before security forces arrive," he said. "In that time, I'm going to tell you exactly how we're going to destroy the Empire. Not with weapons or armies, but with something far more powerful, the Empire's own paranoia." As they made their escape through the chaos of the facility, Ryan outlined his vision. He explained how the Empire's greatest strength, its rigid hierarchy and dependence on technology, could become its greatest weakness. He showed them how to turn the Empire's own systems against it, how to create doubt and discord without firing a single shot. "Your Resistance has been fighting a physical war," Ryan told them as they reached their extraction point. "But the real battle is psychological. The Empire maintains control through fear and absolute certainty in its own superiority. Break that certainty, and the whole system begins to crumble." Voss listened with growing amazement as Ryan detailed the subtle ways he'd undermined the facility's operations. The Resistance leader had spent years planning direct attacks on Imperial installations, never realizing there might be a more effective approach. "You've done more damage in a few months than we've managed in years," Voss admitted as they boarded their stealth transport. "But can these same techniques work on a larger scale?" Ryan's smile was cold and confident. "Commander, what you've seen in the facility was just a test run. The Empire's entire power structure is built on the same foundations of arrogance and fear. And now, thanks to their own arrogance in waking me, we know exactly how to tear those foundations apart." As their ship disappeared into the night, Ryan began sharing his greater vision. The Resistance had been fighting symptoms, but he would show them how to attack the disease itself. The Empire's fall would begin not with a bang, but with a whisper that would grow into a scream of terror as their perfectly ordered world dissolved into chaos. The war was about to change, and the Empire had no idea what was coming. The Last Human, Part 4, Empire of Shadows. High above the imperial capital, in the crystal spires of the Central Command, Grand Admiral Thex Vorlon received the latest reports with growing concern. The empire that had stood unshaken for millennia was experiencing unprecedented instability. It wasn't just the central research facility anymore, similar patterns of dysfunction were emerging across multiple sectors. Impossible, he muttered, his pink eyes scanning the data streams. This level of coordination suggests. A master strategist, completed Admiral Corin Vel, now stripped of his command but summoned to explain the disaster at his facility. One who understands our weaknesses better than we do. Vorlon's stuttered nose ridges flared in anger. You mean the human? A primitive creature from a dead world? A weapon, Vel corrected, his voice hollow. We thought we were studying him, but he was studying us. Everything that happened at the facility, it wasn't random chaos. It was a test run. Meanwhile, in the Resistance's hidden base deep within the abandoned mining colonies of Nexus 7, Ryan Carter was conducting a masterclass in psychological warfare. Commander Voss and his top lieutenants watched in fascination as Ryan explained the art of empire breaking. The empire maintains control through three primary pillars, Ryan explained, his fingers tracing patterns in the holographic display. Fear, technology, and absolute certainty in their own superiority. Break any one of these, and the others begin to crumble. He had already begun implementing his broader strategy. Using the Resistance's existing network of spies and sympathizers, Ryan was introducing subtle corruptions into the Empire's quantum data networks. Each corruption carried encoded instructions that would spread like a virus, causing seemingly random but actually coordinated malfunctions across Imperial systems. But technology is just the beginning, Ryan continued. The real target is their psychological infrastructure. The Empire has spent millennia convincing its citizens that their rule is not just powerful, but inevitable. That their technology is infallible, their authority absolute. He pulled up footage from various Imperial worlds, showing the first signs of his handiwork. Security forces were becoming increasingly paranoid, seeing Resistance agents in every shadow. Officials were questioning their own systems, their own people. The certainty that had defined the Empire was beginning to crack. Major Lyra Nexus, who had initially been skeptical of Ryan's methods, was now one of his most dedicated students. The beauty of it, she observed, is that they're doing most of the damage to themselves. Their own responses to the chaos are creating more chaos. Ryan nodded approvingly. Fear is like a virus. Once it takes hold, people become carriers, infecting others without realizing it. The Empire's own rigid hierarchy becomes its weakness, each level becoming increasingly suspicious of the others. His strategy was multi-layered and patient. While the Resistance's traditional cells continued their usual activities as a distraction, Ryan's specially trained teams were infiltrating Imperial institutions in a very different way. Instead of planting bombs, they planted rumors. Instead of stealing data, they corrupted it in ways that would only become apparent at crucial moments. But Ryan's most insidious weapon was truth, or rather, the Empire's fear of it. He had discovered that the Empire's history was carefully curated, with certain events modified or erased entirely. By introducing fragments of contradictory evidence into official archives, he created uncertainty about the Empire's entire historical narrative. Did you know, he would have his agents whisper in crowded bars, that the official records of the Great Expansion have different dates in different archives? Makes you wonder what else they're hiding. The whispers spread, growing louder with each retelling. Imperial citizens began questioning things they had always taken for granted. The Empire's response, increasing censorship and surveillance, only served to confirm people's suspicions that something was being hidden. In the luxury towers of the Imperial elite, paranoia was taking hold. Ancient noble houses that had coexisted for centuries began suspecting each other of collaboration with the Resistance. Accusations of treason became common, with careers and lives destroyed on the slightest suspicion. Grand Admiral Vorlon watched his perfect world unraveling and did the only thing he knew how to do: he tightened control. Martial law was declared in several sectors. Surveillance was increased. Loyalty tests became mandatory. Each measure intended to restore order instead pushed the Empire closer to chaos. Ryan monitored these developments with cold satisfaction. The Empire's greatest weapon was always fear, he told Voss during one of their strategy sessions. Now that weapon is being turned against them. But even as his plan succeeded beyond expectation, Ryan was haunted by memories of Earth's final days. He saw parallels between the Empire's current actions and the desperate measures that had led to his own world's destruction. The difference was that this time, he was the one engineering the collapse. Commander Voss noticed Ryan's occasional moments of darkness. "Does it bother you?" he asked one evening. "Watching civilization tear itself apart?" Ryan's smile was bitter. "They're not so different from the powers that destroyed Earth. They believe their authority gives them the right to dominate others, to decide who lives and dies. They need to learn that absolute power doesn't exist, it's an illusion that shatters when people stop believing in it." The Resistance's new tactics were proving devastatingly effective. Imperial forces would rush to contain what they thought was a traditional rebellion, only to find nothing but whispers and shadows. By the time they realized the real threat was inside their own ranks, the damage was done. Ryan's influence spread through the Empire like a ghost in the machine. Security systems would fail at crucial moments. Communications would be garbled in ways that created misunderstandings between Imperial forces. Supply chains would mysteriously break down, leaving some sectors with shortages while others had unexplained surpluses. But his masterpiece was yet to come. Through careful manipulation of Imperial data networks, Ryan had discovered something that could shatter the Empire's foundations, evidence that their initial rise to power had been built on a carefully hidden genocide of multiple species. The truth, he told his trained agents, is the ultimate weapon. The Empire has spent millennia building their image as benevolent rulers. One proof of their true nature, released at the right moment, will do more damage than 1,000 battles. As the Empire struggled to maintain control, Ryan Carter watched from the shadows, orchestrating their downfall with the patience of a man who had waited centuries for revenge. The Empire had awakened humanity's last weapon, and now they would learn why psychological warfare was the most devastating kind of all. The game was approaching its final phase, and the Empire was already losing, they just didn't know it yet. The Last Human, Part 5, The Final Gambit. The Imperial Palace's Grand Chamber, once a symbol of unshakable power, now felt like a tomb. Grand Admiral Thex Vorlon stood before the Emergency Council, his usual confidence shattered as he delivered the news that would shake the Empire to its core. The archives were compromised, he announced, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. Not just recent records, everything. Historical documents, military protocols, genetic databases, all of it has been altered. The council erupted in chaos. Centuries of carefully maintained records, the very foundation of imperial authority, had been called into question. Nobody could tell what was real anymore, what was fabricated, what had been changed. In the shadows of the outer systems, Ryan Carter allowed himself a small smile as he watched the transmission. "Truth," he murmured, "is such a fragile thing. Change a few details here and there, and suddenly nobody knows what to believe." Commander Voss stood beside him, pink eyes wide with amazement. "How much of the archives did you actually change?" "That's the beauty of it," Ryan replied, his voice carrying a hint of dark amusement. "We only modified about 5%. But now they'll question everything. The fear of corruption is more devastating than the corruption itself." The Resistance base had evolved from a hidden bunker into a sophisticated command center. Screens displayed real-time data from across the Empire, showing the spreading chaos. Major systems were failing, not from direct attacks, but from the Empire's own increasingly desperate security measures. Dr. Mayan Taller, who had defected to the Resistance after discovering the Empire's true history in the corrupted archives, approached with her latest analysis. "The quantum network is eating itself," she reported, her sharp features tight with concentration. "Their attempts to purge the corrupted data are only spreading it faster." Ryan nodded, unsurprised. He had designed the corruption protocols to use the Empire's own security systems as transmission vectors. Every attempt to contain the damage only made it worse. But Ryan knew the Empire wouldn't go down without a fight. They still had one card left to play, and right on cue, the emergency broadcasts began. Grand Admiral Vorlin's face appeared on every screen in Imperial space. "Citizens of the Empire," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "we are under attack by forces seeking to destroy our way of life. They spread lies about our history, corrupt our data, and turn us against each other. But we know who we are. We know our truth." Ryan watched the broadcast with growing anticipation. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the Empire's last attempt to maintain control through sheer force of will. "They think unity will save them," he told his assembled team. "But I've spent months planting the seeds of doubt. Let's see how their unity holds up against the truth." With a signal to his communications team, Ryan launched the final phase of his plan. Across Imperial space, the official broadcast was suddenly interrupted. Instead of Vorlin's confident declarations, citizens saw something else entirely, the true historical records Ryan had discovered in the deepest parts of the Imperial archives. The footage was devastating. The systematic extinction of lesser species during the Empire's expansion, the genetic engineering programs designed to create the perfect Imperial citizen, the deliberate suppression of technological advancement in conquered worlds. Centuries of carefully hidden atrocities exposed in an instant. But Ryan's masterstroke wasn't just the revelation of these crimes, it was the way he presented them. Mixed with the true atrocities were carefully crafted fabrications, making it impossible for the Empire to deny everything without appearing to confirm everything. "The beautiful thing about doubt," Ryan explained to his team, "is that once it takes root, every denial becomes suspicious. Every explanation sounds like a lie." The Empire's response was predictably harsh. Martial law was declared across all systems. Communications were restricted. Travel was banned. But these measures only served to confirm the population's worst fears. In the industrial sectors, workers began sabotaging their own production lines, believing they were manufacturing weapons for genocide. In the academic worlds, scholars started questioning every historical fact they had ever learned. In the military zones, soldiers began disobeying orders, unsure if they were serving justice or tyranny. The Empire's three pillars, fear, technology, and certainty, were crumbling. Fear had turned inward, technology could no longer be trusted, and certainty had been replaced by devastating doubt. Lieutenant Rana Shull, who had eventually followed Dr. Taller in defecting to the Resistance, watched the chaos spread with a mixture of horror and amazement. "I still don't understand," she admitted to Ryan. "How did you know this would work?" Ryan's eyes darkened with memories of Earth's final days. "Because I've seen it before. I watched my own world tear itself apart because of fear and lies. The difference is, this time the destruction serves a purpose." The final collapse came not with a bang, but with a whisper. In the core worlds, citizens began demanding answers their leaders couldn't provide. In the outer regions, planetary governments started declaring independence. Even within the Imperial military, entire fleets were refusing to follow orders. Grand Admiral Vorlin made one last attempt to maintain control. He ordered a full military strike against known resistance positions, hoping to decapitate the movement in a single blow. But Ryan had anticipated this too. The Imperial fleet arrived at the coordinates, only to find their targeting systems compromised, their communications scrambled, and their own ships turning against each other. In the confusion, no one knew who was loyal and who was a traitor. Ryan watched from the Resistance Command Center as the mighty Imperial fleet tore itself apart. Humanity's last weapon, he mused, wasn't our technology or our strength. It was our understanding of how easily fear can destroy even the mightiest empire. In the end, the empire didn't fall to external forces or military might. It collapsed under the weight of its own paranoia, its rigid structure shattering as doubt and fear spread through every level of society. As the dust settled, Ryan Carter stood with Commander Voss and the Resistance leadership, watching the birth of a new galactic order. The Empire's technological infrastructure was in ruins, its political system in chaos, its population struggling to rebuild their understanding of history and truth. What now? Voss asked, looking out at the stars that no longer belonged to the Empire. Ryan's smile was both triumphant and melancholic. Now we make sure the same mistakes aren't repeated. The Empire fell because it believed in absolute power and absolute truth. The future has to be built on something better. He turned to address the gathered resistance leaders, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of human experience. The Empire thought they found a harmless relic when they discovered my pod. Instead, they found a reminder of why power built on fear and lies will always fall. Humanity's last legacy isn't destruction, it's the knowledge of how to prevent another empire from rising from these ashes. As the new Galactic Council began the process of rebuilding, Ryan Carter, the last human, the weapon that destroyed an empire with whispers and shadows, finally allowed himself to rest. He had completed his mission, not just to survive, but to ensure that the mistakes that destroyed Earth would not be repeated across the stars. The Empire was gone, and in its place, something new would grow. Something, Ryan hoped, that would remember the lesson of humanity's last weapon, that the mightiest empires can fall not to bombs or bullets, but to the simple power of truth and doubt. The end.